What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG. We like it a magic. It is finally time for the first deck tech of Aetherdrift Standard. Yeah, it took me a couple of weeks. It was a big week for Magic. We had a couple of previews come out for different sets, and then there was Pro Tour Aetherdrift, and that was a whole thing. And I kind of had a thing to go do. More on that on the other side of that song that you like. But for now, I got to get into intro mode, and I usually like to start these with a quote from a smart person. I think it was Neil deGrasse Einstein who once said, "If Orzhov could just get some card draw, it would be unstoppable." Pretty sure it was her who said that. Either way, removal spell after removal spell and the occasional chunky guy are just not going to matter if you can't get fresh cards. And even when Orzhov does get options, they kind of aren't good for Orzhov's usual plans, you know? Like, oh, you want to draw cards in white? We got some 3-mana enchantments for you. Caretaker's Talent, Takasi is welcome. Do these look good, sir or madam? And I'm like, well, I don't really have tokens or creatures that trigger the Takasi is welcome, so what else you got? And the shopkeeper's like, okay, we have 3-mana black enchantments. Do you want Phyrexian Arena or Unholy Annex? They also, just like the other cards, only trigger once each turn, and they're a little squishy against disenchants and stuff like that. And also, if you're not careful, they might kill you. And I'm like, okay, those also aren't necessarily what I'm looking for. And that's just the card draw issues. Don't even get me started on the amount of threats that Orzhov actually has at its disposal. It's very little, I'll say that much. But what if I told you that we could solve each and every one of those problems in just one card? And it's all true. It's not some sort of mid-90s infomercial, and I'm not here to sell you a blender. Aetherdrift finally gave us the final stitch in the beautiful quilt that Orzhov has been weaving for years now. We're going to talk about it on the other side of the break. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. And we're back. Make sure you do all the YouTube stuff. Hit the button shaped like a thumb. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet for more content. And if you want to help out, you can check out the Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description. But there is one more thing that I want to remind you to do before we really get to it today. And that is to set your calendars for Monday, March the 3rd, 2025. That's this coming up Monday as I record this, where when you wake up that day, you'll be able to go over to the professor's channel, Tolarian Community College, and catch me both shuffling up and playing. That's right, it's happening, guys. Now, first of all, I want to say that I've seen y'all all out there rallying for me over the last year and a half, something like that, and I do appreciate you for it. But the truth is, me and the professor have been trying to get together on this for at least a couple of years now, and our schedule's finally lined up to where I could fly out there, play a game of what else? Commander. It's not really the format I'm most known for, but I was able to go up there, toting Ellis core in my bag, and I ended up having the time of my life. And ended up having not only a great game of Magic, but also a wonderful experience with 3 other people who would, by the end of my trip, become 3 of my good friends, you know? Not only the professor, who was a great person in case you ever wondered, but also resident MTG tournament caster and showrunner of EDH Hijinks, a show you could go check out. Alias V, you may know her. She's super nice, but also Medic, a League of Legends caster who's not only really popular out here on the internet, but a true gentleman, just a wonderful, wonderful person. So again, just had one of the best experiences I've ever had and a great game of Magic. And if you want to check it out, we're going to be on the professor's channel this coming up Monday. Now, I could talk about that all day. I literally could. And I should note that once that video is out over on the professor's channel, I'll have a Commander Deck Tech over here on my channel covering the deck that I played on Shuffle Up and Play. But for now, I got to talk about a different Orzhov legend, not Ellis core. What kind of SPMTG video is this, right? But back there a second ago, I promised you an Orzhov card that solves not only the card advantage issue that Orzhov has, but in some ways also the threat issue. And we actually got it in Aetherdrift. It's Ketramos, the New Dawn. It's a new day. It's a new dawn. It's a new life for Orzhov. Use a Michael Bublé quote in a deck tech. Go ahead and check that one off the list. Finally, it's only been, 10 years? Why is it even an achievement in the first place? Seems dumb, but this card is the opposite of dumb. This solves every problem that Orzhov once had and will never have again in the history of Orzhov. This draws multiple cards in a turn, and it's really easy to make it do that. Note that it also triggers whenever your opponent plays around in graveyards or, they exile a thing from the table. As long as it's your turn, you draw cards off of that action, and you're just putting more cards in exile for Ketramose. That's one kind of wonky thing I want to bring up real quick that we don't talk about enough with this card, is that a lot of cards have conditions. You get enough cards in your graveyard, things happen, If you got enough creatures on the table, a thing happens. Well, your opponent can manipulate those numbers pretty easily, but once a card's in exile, it's kind of in exile, and your opponent can't do much about it. So even if they can exile your Ketramos, that's just another card in exile for the next Ketramos, because, again, they can't really manipulate the number of cards you have in exile very easily. And on that note, while there are some things in Standard that can exile this, sure, it's still nowhere near as fragile against a ton of removal as a lot of the enchantments that I brought up at the top of the video are, and there's some creatures in Standard standard that can draw you cards, and it again is nowhere near as squishy as those. Indestructible helps a lot, especially when some of the cards that might be able to deal with it, like say minus toughness enchantments, nowhere to run, or things like Virtue of Persistence or stuff, its toughness is above those cards too. So there's precious few cards in Standard that can actually deal with this. And even if they do Sunfall it draws you a card. So again, not only does it draw a bunch of cards over the course of a game, but it's also a big, dumb, fat attacker that you can end games with. It's everything that Orzhov wanted in one big old peanut butter sandwich. I don't know why I went with peanut butter sandwich. That's just, maybe I'm snacky right now. Oh, and by the way, before we look at the rest of the deck and all the cards that synergize with this and whatnot, I should probably apologize for the card being almost $50. Not because I did that, but because it does all that stuff that I was just talking about a second ago. A card's going to be expensive when it does all that stuff, but it's obviously super good in Commander, out of your command zone. Gavin Verhey has already demonstrated that over on Commander at home with Brian and Olivia. He was doing wacky stuff with this card in Commander, so we know it's good there, but we also know that it's good in competitive environments like Standard, Pioneer, and maybe even beyond. Again, it's already posting MTGO results in leagues and challenges this season, so the card is going to command a couple of bucks. That's because this little sweetie pie over here works with so many things that you probably want to play in your deck anyway. In our deck, we're going to focus mostly on removal, but we have to play some threats aside from just Ketramos, and we might want to draw some cards apart from just Ketramos as well. So let's take a look at how we built this thing. Now we are playing some removal in this deck. I guess I'll put it that way for starters, man. We have a few different really good exile pieces in Orzhov right now. So let's take a look at just about all of them. We're going to play 3 copies of Elspeth's Smite in our deck, but we're also going to play 2 copies of Anoint with Affliction and 2 copies of Legions to Ashes to get started. Now, Smite is very good right now. There are 3 different hardball aggro decks in the top 8 of PT Aetherdrift, and they're all different flavors, but they're all just aggro decks at their heart, and there are even other aggro decks like Convoke that didn't make that top 8. Aggro is a real deck right now, and even outside of aggro, this can take care of things like Unstoppable Slasher and Mosswood Dread Knight forever. Matter of fact, most of the cards in our deck do things like that, like Anoint with Affliction, which can also take out the aforementioned 3 and 2 drops respectively for the rest of the game, but can also take out tons and tons of creatures like a Boron Oculus that you might have to worry about. Jeskai Oculus was another breakout deck at the top 8 of Pro Tour Aetherdrift, and I imagine you're going to see a little bit more of that than you did over the last couple of months when it was just, Azorius Oculus. So be prepared with Anoint with Affliction. It is great against big ol' eyes. And Legions to Ashes just kind of deals with it all, sorcery speed, which can sometimes kind of suck, but you're definitely willing to pay the price when it blows up just about anything you could be facing off against. If your opponent's trying to play some of those whack enchantments that we brought up at the top of the video, like Caretaker's Talent or Unholy Annex or whatever, this will help you take care of those, but it also blows up Urabrass Forge and problem vehicles and any weird artifacts people are playing like Simulacrum Synthesizer and just about any creature that you could name, plus Planeswalkers. I mean, it says non-land permanent right now, and I'm just kind of going over what all of those are to give you a sense of scope on this card. Again, I think sorcery speed is worth it like 9 times out of 10, really 99 times out of 100. This is still a good Magic card. But I'm also on more removal, if you can imagine. There's even more after this, but first we got to look at the 4 copies of Rides In, the 2 copies of Exercise, and the 3 deadly cover-up on screen here. Now, Rides In, believe it or not, is another brand new card from Aetherdrift. It's not just Kiki in this deck. That set had some decent cards in it. In this case, we get the best version of an effect that's been printed into white over the last couple of years here. A thing that looks like it costs a lot of mana, but if it targets the right kind of creature, in this case a tapped creature, then it costs way less mana. And it exiles too. It's just perfect for this deck. It can blow up vehicles sometimes post-combat. Just a decent little Magic card. But we've also got 2 Exercise, which is a super important card to carry in your main deck. I know this is a best of 3 video, but trust me, you want to play this in your main deck. Domain Overlords just put 3 copies in the top 3, of the last Pro Tour. The entire podium was Domain Overlords decks, so this card can blow up. All of their Overlords, they're up the beanstalk, they're Leyline Binding. There's a ton of targets in that deck for this card, so trust me, you want to play this, but it blows up tons of other stuff, from not only artifacts and enchantments, a lot of which I've already named when we talked about Legions to Ashes, but a ton of huge creatures too, like Oculus and Sheldred, takes out the occasional Biza, so just an all-around good card card again, despite the sorcery speed. You're willing to do it, trust me. But the other card on the page here is Deadly Cover-Up, which is really good with our Ketramos. You would think that it wouldn't be because it doesn't exile anything, but that's actually where you're wrong. We exile things from our graveyard when we collect evidence. So we'll draw a card, we'll get rid of the best thing in their graveyard for the rest of the game, never have to worry about it again. And the Deadly Cover-Up doesn't kill our Ketramos, which is very sick, actually. So I love this. Sometimes it puts multiple cards into exile for Ketramos, and there's even turns where you're going to wipe the board main phase 1 on your turn so that this can, collect evidence 2 or 3 cards out of your graveyard, and you can kind of surprise attack with Ketramos that turn. That's a pretty often done play in this deck. So collect evidence, just ridiculous on this card, but honestly, you just want a main deck sweeper right now for all kinds of different purposes. And to, I guess, kind of finish off the removal, we've got 1 copy of Season of the Burrow, 1 Blot Out, and 1 Get Lost. This deck is going to play a fair number of 2-ofs and silver bullets and stuff because we're trying to be prepared for every kind of threat in the format. So don't be surprised if you see a few 1-ofs. Decks like these kind of need them. Now, Season of the Burrow, we're playing a 1-of because we really don't want to play a 2, 3, or 4-of. You don't need a lot of this card in your deck, especially when we're already packing 3 main deck 5-drops apart from it. So I don't want to play a bunch of these, but it can exile whatever and draw us a card. I like that about it, but it can also just put bodies on the table, and there's nothing wrong with that. Blot Out can blow up a Kaito, which is super important. That's why I'm carrying not only a copy in the main deck, but also 1 in the sideboard. Kaito's really good against not just us, but every deck in the format right now. So Blot Out is a great way of actually dealing with their Kaito. And then the Get Lost, this may not exile, but it does cover a lot of bases for us. It blows up enchantments and stuff too. I like that about it. And it doesn't have to hit an attacking creature the way that like Ride Down or Ride's End has to. So I just wanted like another 1-of removal spell. I wanted it to cost like relatively little to cast. And most importantly, I wanted it to be instant speed, unlike some of our other removal spells. I wanted it to be relatively unconditional, and just Get Lost meets all of these criteria. So I kind of don't care if it exiles. I still think it's worth keeping 1 copy of. But getting back to cards that do exile things, I'm also on 2 copies of Dreams of Steel and Oil, as well as 2 Ghost Vacuum and 1 Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And this can make your Ketramos larger, and that's good if you have no other creatures on the table. Just having Ketramos get larger is great, because when it can finally attack, it's going to attack as like a 6 power menace or whatever, lifelink most importantly, and you want that. So Soul Cauldron is just very good in combination with the Kiki. But also Ghost Vacuum is kind of an extension of our Agatha Soul Cauldron. These are like legendary and stuff, so we can't really carry like too many copies of them, but we do want like 3 of this effect on a cheap artifact in our deck because it works so well with Ketramos. It often draws a card the turn that Ketramos comes down. That's really good. And they give us, basically an extra card every single turn if we're doing it right. These are just ridiculous. But Dreams of Steel and Oil is kind of our way of working a duress effect into the deck that is the direct opposite of duress. If nothing else, this can be 1 mana draw card, and that can be good enough if you're just trying to churn through cards in your deck. So Dreams has just been a dream card in this deck, and I guess note too, it's pretty obvious. I've already said the word exile a bunch of times when referring to the card, but this gets rid of threats forever and ever and ever, and that's just really, really good. Now that is a lot of ways of drawing cards off of our new friend, but Kiki can't be the only way of drawing cards in the deck, so I've also included a couple of copies of Maze Mine Tome here. Now, this is an option that decks that don't have good card draw have had for a little while here, and it's actually been pretty decent in the format thus far, but it's especially good in this deck, right? Ketramos is losing you life. This will also gain you back some of the life Ketramos is losing you, but it also exiles itself from the battlefield when it does that, so it will draw you a card off of Ketramos. Just ridiculous card draw engine, and it kind of always has been a little underrated still to this day somehow, even though everyone knows it's good, but in this deck it's even better than it usually is, and that's kind of scary. But just like we can't only rely on Ketramos for drawing us cards, we also can't only rely on Ketramos for winning us games as a threat. We have to play some big cards that can finish games off here. So with that in mind, I'm going to start with 2 copies of Beza the Bounding Spring. Is it Beza? Beza sounds more fun to say. Beza the Bounding Spring in our deck. Now, I wasn't super thrilled about including this card at first, honestly, because it doesn't actually curve from Ketramos very well. If they're turn 3 Ketramos, turn 4 Beza, you did nothing for Ketramos at all, but there just aren't a whole lot of cards in Standard that are very good with Ketramos on turn 4. There are decent cards in Standard, but I felt like nothing could really beat the power level of Biza, and again, we need another solid threat to help close out games. And occasionally, this will also be another way of drawing us cards. We welcome as many ways of doing that as possible. Gain us some life. We know we're going to be losing some to Ketramos, so that's a good thing. And especially when it puts extra creatures on the table we can now attack and block with, we will take that extra couple of turns it usually buys us. So yeah, even though it doesn't curve super well and it looks awkward, I will still take 2 copies of Biza all day. And the same thing is true of our 1 copy of Sheldred the Apocalypse. This card is $80. I am so sorry. Again, I didn't do it. Like, in none of these times did I do it. I just feel personally responsible for no reason. Either way, if you already have copies of this crafted up on Arena, which, it's probably where you're going to play this deck most of the time, then you might want to just throw 1 copy of Shelly in here. I kind of feel like I want 2 copies, but in most cases, I think Biza's the card that we want more. But we'll finish off the non-lands in the deck with a couple of Planeswalkers that advance our plan, but also in the game. We're playing 1 copy of the Eternal Wanderer in this deck. I feel like 1 copy is all we need. The same is true of our other Planeswalker. Again, you're going to see some silver bullets in this deck, but usually you just want to draw 1 copy of a bomb Planeswalker, and that'll go a long way towards winning you a game. Eternal Wanderer is definitely the epitome of that. This can go behind our sweepers and start putting creatures into play. It can go behind our spot removal and start putting creatures into play, and that'll just eventually overwhelm the opponent. But we can use the +1 to wipe tokens, notably the 6/6 Flying Demon from an Unholy Annex. We really beat that card, but either way, this can wipe all kinds of other tokens and just draw us a card anytime we use the +1 ability, which is fabulous. But apart from that, this can also be a pseudo sweeper effect that allows us to keep our Ketramos in play. That's ridiculous. Just a wonderful little magic card that, again, not only helps draw cards off of Ketramos, but is just, again, a must-answer threat that if the opponent can't do anything about, will probably run away with the game. And if all that's true of the Eternal Wanderer, then it's definitely true of Kaya Intangible Slayer. This thing doesn't just run away with games, it's Sonic the Hedgehog's away with games, man. It sets records and stuff. Kaya has always kind of been a fantastic and really reliable win condition that's honestly in a ton of sideboards in this format already. Now that we have Ketramos, both drawing us into fresh cards, more removal to get us deeper into the game so we can actually land the Kaya. And once we do land the Kaya, it's gaining us life. The Kaya is, the Ketramos probably is by then being a threat in and of itself. And once the 2 cards are combined, it's just, again, not really much that most opponents can do. Kaya was already enough pressure, but again, with Ketramos not only drawing us those removal spells to get us deeper, but drawing us lands to actually get to the Kaya in the first place, match made in heaven. Peanut Butter and Ladies. The 2 cards are just ridiculous together, and I feel like Kaya can finally come out of the sideboard and be a real win condition in the main deck now. Speaking of win conditions in the main deck, let's take a look at the lands. What a weird sentence. Well, we got 4 Restless Fortress in there, which is actually key to winning tons and tons of games. We've got spot removal after spot removal after spot removal and some sweepers in this deck. So we're mostly just looking to keep the board clear, And if we can do that, Restless Fortress can sometimes win games all by its lonesome, and it also gains us a little bit of life. But mostly its best function is just as another attacking threat that, again, bolts the opponent every turn, sometimes along with a Kaya. This increases the clock in such a way that they really just have to scoop. So Restless Fortress, again, kind of the best threat in the entire deck. But we've also got Fountain Port in there to make little 1/1 tokens when we want it to. But this can obviously ramp and, I think most importantly, draw us cards when we need them. So Fountain Port just kind of does everything. It justifies playing 26 lands in the deck. But let's take a look at this sideboard. A pretty important one, but you want to talk about silver bullets, man? There's more silver in this sideboard than a pawn shop. We're going to start with 1 copy of Soul Guide Lantern over here, which is just another one of these effects like a Ghost Vacuum or a Soul Cauldron or whatever, but it exiles the opponent's entire graveyard, an effect that I find to be pretty useful a lot of the time. If opponent's trying to gear up for a huge Raise the Past or something like that, Soul Guide Lantern's usually the better choice. We've got a 4th Elspeth Smite to further respect the aggro decks in Standard, 2 more Exercise to further respect the enchantments decks, mostly in Standard, but there's a few decks that play a bunch of artifacts that you might want to wipe out with Exercise too. We've got 3 copies of Rest in Peace to finish off the 2-drop slot in the sideboard. This is obviously ridiculous. Anytime any card goes to a graveyard for more or less any reason, you're going to draw cards, so long as it went from, the battlefield at least. But Malicious Eclipse is the next card we'll talk about. This is just a concession again to the aggro decks, but it also exiles. So if we have a Ketramos in play, this can draw us a card. I kind of like that, but we mostly need some effect that can be a 3-mana sweeper, and I trust this more than temporary lockdown in a deck where we're playing Maze Mind Tomes. Finally, a second copy of Kaya Intangible Slayer. I said she could come out of the sideboard and be in the main deck. That's true, but doesn't mean I'm not going to carry a sideboard copy still. With all that out of the way, here are those power rankings. A final score of 67, pretty respectable despite the fact that some stats like speed and offense are lower than an earthworm's butthole, but every other stat here is at least good. And a couple of scores are real standouts like defense and versatility. This deck can do a lot against a lot of different decks, and although offense might win games, defense wins championships. Apart from that, we are one of those odd decks that's usually better after we can adjust to our opponent's game plan in games 2 and 3. And the consistency is pretty high in this one too, because not only are we 2 colors, our mana base is great at providing those colors. And even though there's only a bunch of 2s and 1s, and you'd think that wouldn't be consistent, we have plenty of ways of drawing those cards. So it makes our deck far more consistent than a bunch of silver bullets would lead you to believe. But if you're going to believe that, it's probably easier to show you than tell you. So let me try to convince you with the example game this week. Now we're up against Dr. Hutch for this one. He's playing a nice little mono-white life gain deck with upgrades. In the end, I could have chosen a bunch of more complex and longer games to show you, but I liked this game. I feel like it's illustrative of what usually happens when we play against most decks with creatures. So opponent gets a Ruin Lurker bat down, and we can Dreams of Steel of Oil on our turn 2, getting their Essence Channeler out of their hand forever. On their next turn, they're just going to play a Hinterland Sanctifier, get their life gain plan together, get in for 1 with Ruin Lurker bat. We thought about Elspeth smiting it, but we should probably just wait until we can draw a card off of it. We Ketramos on turn 3, knowing they're going to Sheltered by Ghosts it away. That's not a big deal. They get in for a few damage, and on our turn, we can play a land and say go. We'll just hold up the Elspeth Smite. If they play the Linden, we might consider giving them a turn to attack us, but they don't. So we're just going to fire off the Smite on the bat, pay the extra mana for the ward, who cares, get our Ketramos back, and go down to 15. Opponent's going to shock us here by playing a Leyline Axe with the rest of their mana on their turn, but we get a cool trick. We can Pit of Offerings and take away the Sheltered by Ghosts from their yard, draw a card off Ketramos. Problem is we can't do too much more this turn, so we say go. That said, the opponent doesn't have much to do either. They just equip the Leyline Axe and swing away, knowing we can't block. They put us at 10, starting to be a dangerous life total, but it's not a big deal. We can just play the Eternal Wanderer here, +1 it, take care of the rabbit, unequip the Leyline, and draw a card off of Ketramos, who has already done a good bit of work this game for us. On their turn, they'll decide they're finally going to play the Linden, and then after that, they're going to get their Hinterland Sanctifier back and pass turn. We don't care too much. All we really have to do here is Deadly Cover Up. We don't even have to worry about collecting evidence, but we get a 2/2 double striker off of our Eternal Wanderer, and they begin to see the writing on the wall. Good game, opponents. Now, that is it for this one, but it's not all you can do with Ketramos in this environment. This one is actually pretty buttoned up compared to some of the other lists that I've seen in MTGO results so far this season. Again, a lot of them work with like Agatha's Soul Cauldron to get rid of a creature in your graveyard, give all your dudes an activated ability, and draw a card at the same time, do crazy stuff. But this one, again, this one's wearing a suit. It's got a tie all the way up. It didn't even unbutton the top button and bring the tie down like a normal person. No, it's all the way laced up. It's obviously a serious deck. Just let me know what your Ketramos builds are like down there, because I know a lot of you are excited about this card, and you knew that I was too, right? This was my #1 card on my top 25 list for Aetherdrift, so I've been messing around with it for a while, and I had a little extra time to put this deck together than I usually do the first deck tech of the season, and I think it shows. We got a really solid deck in our hands. That said, join us next time for whatever deck the patrons pick. You want to help pick decks? It's just $1 a month over on patreon.com/SBMTG. I'll leave a link in the description of that too, but I'll leave a link to a bunch of other stuff down there in the comments, videos, or, well, in the description, rather, the doobly-doo, as they call it here on YouTube. If you want to check that stuff out, it would mean a lot to me. But apart from that, just remember to check me out on Shuffle Up and Play over on the Professor's channel this coming Monday, March the 3rd, 2025. I'm really excited about it, and I hope the edit makes everybody look good. I do. We had a great game of Magic over there. I can't wait for you guys to see it. Apart from that, though, I'm donezo over this one. So just do the YouTube stuff as you file out. Hit the like button. It's the one shaped like a thumb. You really can't miss it. You can also sub to the channel if you want more of this for some reason. But I guess that I'm done at this one. That is Allski Kowalski, as we like to say. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love. and be kind.